Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello?
Is this Mrs. Dorothy Letterman?
That's right, Dorothy.
Yes, it is. Who's this?
Are you the mother of David Letterman who does Late Night on NBC?
She was never invited to return, not for a cameo or a tribute appearance, and not even when the ratings dropped and the applause changed. One week, she was Carson's golden girl, and the next week, she did not exist. No word, just a silent, brutal banishment. She was never permitted to return to the Johnny Carson show after this, and she was not alone. A few stars also found themselves on the wrong side of Johnny Carson's smile. And when Johnny went cold, Hollywood turned its back. What sort of late-night king makes an empire on charm and fear? We're going to find out. There was a time in Hollywood where one show had everything in its pocket. If you wanted to be noticed, this was the place. You were eager to be taken seriously. You just needed to fill that 5-minute spot. And if you were amazing, overnight, everything changed. But there was a catch. That spot came with unwritten rules that no one would ever say out loud, but everyone comprehended. And the worst part of all, you never had to get on the wrong side of Hollywood bullies, because once you did, you were finished. Some of the biggest names in the business suddenly found themselves locked out. Not because they weren't good or the audience didn't adore them, but because Johnny Carson determined that they no longer belonged. And when Johnny turned his back to you, so did the rest of the industry. The thing is, most everyone watching at home never knew any of this. They simply tuned in for laughs, but beneath the laughter and cheers was a tension that was unspoken. One miscalculation, one misinterpreted moment, and it was done. Sometimes it was something minor. If a guest crossed the line with a joke or failed to allow Johnny the final word, it'd be a problem. Other times, it was something more, born of loyalty conflicts and business choices that felt like betrayal. And then there were the personal grudges that began off-camera and concluded in complete radio silence. What made it all the more compelling was how subtle it was all along. No one was called out in public. There weren't dramatic, headline-grabbing fights or messy tabloid coverage. People simply did not appear. And if you asked anyone, you received a shrug. Or a soft, you know how it is. But for those that came back on, it was crushing. Years of effort might be lost with one forgotten invite. Being blackballed by Carson wasn't terrible for your ego. It could destroy your career. That's the part of the story that doesn't get told. The true story existed behind the curtain, in the monikers that were never spoken once more and the guest chairs that remained vacant. So what was so powerful about The Tonight Show? What provided it with that sort of power over lives, reputations, and destinies? To determine that, we need to examine the show itself. The Tonight Show era, it's difficult to describe just how large the Tonight Show era, The Tonight Show, with Johnny Carson, was unless you experienced it yourself. This wasn't simply a late-night talk show. It was the place to be, particularly if you were an up-and-coming star, an anxious stand-up comedian, or a Hollywood big gun with a new movie to promote. Actually, if you got a place on The Tonight Show, you were created, and that was that. Johnny possessed this ability to make everything seem easy. His smirking smile, the fact that he'd hang up on a punchline for half a beat longer than you anticipated. Timing that couldn't be learned. And don't even begin on Karnak, the Magnificent, wearing dollar store fortune teller regalia, with sealed envelopes pressed to his head, and telling jokes that became funnier for being utterly absurd. It was dorky and strange, but it was iconic. But where the actual power lay was how he might so effortlessly open a career with one nod, one laugh, and one easy wave to come over and join the interview chair following their set. That Carson wave was the holy grail. Guys such as David Letterman or Jerry Seinfeld could attest to what that moment was all about. And if you ask, they'll say it made everything different. And tens of millions of listeners listened each and every evening. This was prior to streaming, prior to being able to view clips on your phone while partially listening to a podcast. You saw Johnny when he was on television, or you did not, and believe me, no one wanted to not see him. What did it for all of us were his monologue, sketches, guest, and musical act that's been imitated since its inception over the years. Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, also talk show hosts, employed it, and even Stephen Colbert, host of the Late Night Show with Stephen Colbert, is utilizing it currently. Carson not only hosted a show, He created the template for late-night television that exists today. He ran that empire so effortlessly for 30 years, and for at least 20 of those, he was invulnerable. But when the cameras went off and the applause died away, a different Johnny emerged. Underneath the charm and the humor, things were not nearly as slick. Sometimes they got downright nasty. You see, as far as Carson's power went, it had its disadvantages, and if you crossed him, there were going to be consequences. You wouldn't just be eliminated from the show, you were eliminated from the conversation altogether. Though Johnny's endorsement might make you a star, losing his endorsement might totally destroy you. This wasn't about egos bruised or a lost TV spot. Being banned from The Tonight Show at that time meant being wiped out from the memory of the industry. Bookers would not call back, studio executives would freeze, and other shows kept their distance, fearing to tread on Johnny's toes. He did not need to utter a word in public. His silence spoke volumes. Everyone just knew that if Carson had spoken to you, you were finished. It was yet more ruthless because he did not need to state out loud. All he had to do was simply discuss his day, and the individual on the wrong end of his mic would no longer get booked, and it never escapes everyone in the business. Certain comedians attempted to discount it. Others, such as Rich Little, learned the hard way. Rich Little was a great impressionist who got the boot for spoofing Johnny too frequently, though the party line was that his stuff had simply gotten stale. Another comedian was Dana Carvey, who did a perfect Carson impression in promoting Wayne's World. Carson didn't think it was amusing, and he didn't comment on it, but he banned Carvey, period. And the most terrifying thing was that there was never any established line or rule book to understand where the edge was, until you fell off it. So, who had the guts to mess with Johnny? And who got hurt? The Joan Rivers fallout, if there was anybody Johnny. Under his wing was Carson took Joan Rivers. In the 1960s, she was a new, no-holds-barred comedian with a wit as quick as her tongue and a passion in her belly that attracted Johnny to her. He featured her on The Tonight Show when women comedians were not quite the status quo, and he gave her regular status. Beyond that, he offered her a chance at national fame, particularly after she was rejected several times for being washed up at the tender age of 31 years. Joan had been grinding in the clubs, hustling to get sets, barely making ends meet when Carson put her on The Tonight Show. And after she killed that first set, he looked into the camera, smiled, and said to America, "You're going to be hearing a lot about this girl." And that one statement flipped the switch. Overnight, Rivers went from nothing to being hired as a writer on The Tonight Show, courtesy of Carson. Not only did he provide her with an opportunity to shine, he also tutored, promoted, and even had her as his regular guest hostess when he worked nights off. To the world outside, it seemed like a dream team, the late-night king and his queen-in-waiting. But behind all the smiles and applause, a tempest was building. In 1986, Joan received an offer from Fox to host her own late-night show. It was historic news, as Fox was a new network, and this was an opportunity for her to be the first woman to host a significant late-night talk show. She didn't make the decision hastily. Based on interviews, Joan was frightened. She didn't want to hurt Johnny, but at the same time, she could see that NBC wasn't going to offer her The Tonight Show when Carson did finally retire. And worst of all, she discovered from NBC executives that she wasn't even in the running, so she accepted the Fox deal. But the piece that turned the whole thing around was that she didn't inform Johnny first. Carson learned through the grapevine and not from Joan. He was angry, and it wasn't the anger you scream about and then move on. Carson was quiet, icy, and brimming with calculated anger. He hung up on her when she phoned and would not talk to her ever again. He didn't respond to her letters and didn't recognize her attempts to call out to him for years. After that, she was out. Not only off The Tonight Show, but she was blacklisted and banned. The worst part is, anyone who showed up on her Fox show wasn't invited on Johnny's couch either. People close to the show said Carson felt ambushed. It wasn't so much that she left for a new show, he was about loyalty. He believed she'd done something behind his back, and in Carson's universe, that wasn't something you could forgive. She was like a daughter to him, recalled one of his former staffers. But once you were in Johnny's doghouse and broke that trust, you were finished. Joan, for her part, was devastated. Years later, in interviews, her voice still broke when discussing Johnny. She referred to him as the single most important figure in her career. She claimed she wrote him a letter annually, hoping and praying for him to get back to her, but nothing ever returned. Not even a word. And it did not end in silence. Carson ensured her name was removed from The Tonight Show record. For decades, footage of her visits was hidden. Her name was not spoken